Hello, everyone. So we're going to officially start this webinar. I hope you can all hear me okay. So welcome to today's webinar about risk management and real examples in pest and weed control. My name is Anna Pimenta and I am the Land Care Development Coordinator with Land Care Victoria. I want to start by acknowledging the important work that volunteers contribute every day to running environmental groups, being that governance, planting trees, or controlling weeds and pests. Please note that the advice provided by Land Care Victoria and our guest speakers this evening is intended as general guidance only. We do recommend seeking tailored professional advice for any complex or specific questions that we might not be able to address today. Today's session won't go into detailed information about particular pests or weeds. However, we do hope that the case studies presented will help everyone put risk management principles into practice. Other webinars, both past and upcoming, cover more specific pest and weed management topics in greater detail, such as the foxes webinar we had in April this year. And so why does risk management matter? Well, it is something that every group should take seriously. It helps protect people, the environment, and the group's reputation while ensuring projects are delivered safely, effectively, and sustainably into the future. Good risk management also helps prevent incidents, reduces the likelihood of claims, and ensures the group meets the safety and compliance requirements of our insurance coverage. Before we start, we'd like to pay our respects to the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we are meeting today. Land Care Victoria recognises the ongoing role of traditional owners in caring for land, water, sky and wildlife, and acknowledges the deep connections that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have to the country. I would like to personally acknowledge the Gunai Kunai peoples, the land I am working on today here in Gippsland, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present. Just some quick housekeeping before we get stuck into it. So first, please don't feel like you need to write everything down. This session is being recorded and the presentation slides and any relevant resources will be shared with all of you. Please note that all participants' microphones have been muted. We will be stopping briefly after each section to answer questions and again at the end if the time permits. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any time to pose a question. We do have a lot to cover tonight, so if you have any question that goes unanswered or something you'd like to follow up, please don't hesitate to contact us after this webinar. As I mentioned, I am Anna Pimenta and I'm here on behalf of Land Care Victoria. I'm also joined by my colleague Sarah Vella. She's our communications officer who will be assisting you with answering some questions and helping with the session. So we're pleased to present you our main speaker for tonight, that is Natalie Turner from Threat Consulting. Natalie will give you an overview on risk management and how you can put this into practice in your organization. We're also lucky to have a range of speakers tonight. We have Marisa Heath, she's a biosecurity manager for AgVic, and he will be sharing with you some of the regulations and legislation you need to be aware when handling chemicals. We also have Robbie Gray, is the operation manager at Basque Coast Land Care Network. He'll be showcasing in practical terms how his team puts risk management into practice when controlling weeds. We are also very pleased to have Daryl Snowden from SSA Victoria. Daryl will clarify some of the legalities around the use of firearms when controlling pests in Victoria. And finally, we will have Des Lavery from the Cardinia Deer Coalition, they're a member of Land Care Victoria, to showcase how the group manages risk when using firearms to control deer. Before I hand over to Natalie, I would also like to acknowledge the funding provided by the Victorian Government through the Partnerships Against Pests program that has made the delivery of this session and others possible. And so head over to Natalie now.
Thanks very much, Anna. And hello, everyone. Thank you for having me this evening. Just a quick, if we can flick to the agenda, Anna, just a quick overview of what I'm going to cover. So we're going to kick off with a big bang, which is a real sort of global level case study of what happens when risk management goes wrong. We're going to do a couple of definitions. We're going to talk about why risk management matters, although I'm very much going to be repeating what Anna said in her introduction. We're going to have a look at the risk management cycle and then go through what I think are the four key components of developing a decent risk management plan. And then we'll wrap up with a reminder of what good risk management looks like in practice. So to kick off, the Big Bang. When real life resembles a Tom Cruise movie, you know something has gone wrong. I'm going to talk about a real life case study so we can have a think about what happens when risk management fails. So if we can skip on to the next. So Deepwater Horizon, a lot of you will know about this case back from 2010. An offshore drilling rig suffered a massive explosion operated by BP. Obviously, the consequences were extremely far-reaching. 11 people lost their lives. Many, many more workers were seriously injured. It was the biggest marine oil spill in history, which meant that fishing and tourism industries also collapsed in the area. And obviously, BP's reputation was severely damaged, probably not damaged enough given the consequences, and they had to cough up $65 billion in fines, compensation and clear up costs. So why is this relevant for this evening? Well, this disaster clearly stemmed from risk management failures. So in pursuit of saving time and awfully cutting costs, critical safety protocols were ignored. Some of the technology was not designed well. The well design was flawed, and the blowout preventer, which was supposed to stop this kind of disaster from happening, failed. It was very clear from inquiries that risk assessments and contingency planning were totally inadequate. And to make this worse, there was incredibly poor communication between BP and their contractors, which meant that responsibilities were really unclear. And I think it's in its horrendousness, it's an excellent example of why being proactive in risk management and not treating it just as a compliant measure is absolutely critical. What is risk? Can we move to the next slide, please, Anna? So if we just think in very simple terms about what risk is, it really is the effect of uncertainty on achieving objectives and influencing out how goals are achieved within an organization. In everyday terms, risk is the chance that something unexpected happens. Managing risks, and in thinking about managing risk, we appreciate that some risks can be predicted and planned for, while others are sudden and require a level of resilience in the organisation for a decent response. When we think about what risk is, we think about it in different sorts of categories. So some of the very typical categories bandied around in risk management are financial, strategic, operational, technological, environment, or reputational. And these are the risk categories that we're going to look at a bit later when we think about practical approaches to managing risks. But we should also appreciate that risk also includes leveraging opportunities. So obviously, doing anything involves a level of risk, but when managed effectively, it can improve outcomes and success. It's not always about managing threats. So given that, let's have a think about then what risk management is. So there's a little bit of a definition there from Harvard University, which is, pretty standard. Risk management is about being proactive rather than reactive. So instead of waiting for problems to arise, organizations use risk management to anticipate potential risks and put realistic plans in place to deal with them. As we said before, it's not solely about avoiding negative outcomes. It allows organisations to take calculated risks in pursuit of delivering objectives. And I think our expert speakers after me are gonna really bring that to life with their examples, because pretty much everything we do involves a decent amount of risk. Risk management should provide a framework for organisations to protect their people, assets and reputation, while also enabling them to leverage opportunities. For me, in really simple terms, it just transforms uncertainty from something purely threatening into something really manageable, and it should guide better decisions at every level of an organisation. So given that as a simple definition of risk management, let's think about why it matters. Well, Deepwater Horizon is an excellent example of why it matters to get it right. And as Anna said very much in the beginning, for organisations that don't quite work on the scale of BP, there are probably 4 really key things which also overlap. So all these reasons why it matters overlap. So obviously maintaining a sustainable financial position, so an organisation can continue to do its good work. Particularly with organisations like those represented on this call, there is the reducing the likelihood of environmental harm through operations. It's also a very important reason. We also have the maintaining safety, because we are doing things like using firearms and using chemicals and tools. So we want to make sure we reduce the likelihood of incidents and claims, and particularly reducing the chance of one of our organisations finding out they were negligent and responsible for the incident, which obviously can affect your financial position if you are not properly covered. And finally, but not least, reputation, which is always important. So good risk management will support a strong public image. It will mean that stakeholders have trust in an organisation, including staff and volunteers having confidence in that organisation to keep them safe and follow proper procedures, which will impact retention. And obviously avoiding negative publicity. Risk management is not a procedural exercise. To me and to many others, it's a critical foundation for protecting organisations, their staff, their resources and their long-term viability. So very important. We might move on to the next slide, Anna. So risk management, like many other sorts of management, is a process at its core. We always think about it in a cyclical way because it needs to be continuous. So here is a very standard risk management cycle, which takes us from risk identification, which is obviously the identification of any potential threats or opportunities, through to the analysis of those risks. So thinking about how likely is that risk to happen, and if it did, what's its impact? And that analysis helps us to prioritise our resources at those risks which are going to have the greatest impact. Then there's risk assessment. So that is where we think about the likelihood and the impact, and we work out what responses are going to help us manage that. And obviously that assessment again helps us focus on those risks which are significant, but also track the more minor ones. Risk treatment is up next. Now, for me, this is the most critical part because it's where we turn our plan into action on the ground. So there are lots of ways you can treat risks. You can avoid them altogether. You can reduce its likelihood with preventative measures. You can transfer risk through insurance or via contracts, or you can accept risks and prepare appropriate contingency plans. For me, treatment turns all of that identification, analysis and assessment into action when it is properly flowed through into your governance and operational practices. And finally, and last but not least, risk monitoring, which closes the loop. So risks, as we know, change over time. They change as systems develop, they change as our environment changes. And regular monitoring and a review will ensure that those strategies we've put in place remain effective, that we apply the lessons we've learned from incidents, and that we can maintain really clear communication with our stakeholders. And it's this monitoring, as I said, that makes the cycle continuous rather than one-off. And probably the biggest message is that it does have to be continuous and it does have to be embedded. So to that effect, we're going to have a look at what I think are the 4 key components to a risk management plan. So, and these are really simple. And I have to name check that Landcare Victoria have some great resources, very simple resources, simple is always better. They have an activity risk assessment form and some really clear guidelines, which will take you through the majority of what I am talking about today with some additional detail. So you can see here that component number 1 of a decent risk management plan is a risk matrix. Landcare Victoria have one. This is where this beautiful multicoloured table on the right comes from. It's very simple. You can see it combines likelihood, otherwise known as probability, on the vertical, and the consequence or impact on the horizontal. So we can use this matrix to assess our risks, analyse and assess our risks, and give them a rating. You can see that green represents low risk, yellow and orange are medium to high, and red is those critical risks. So those are the ones where you want to be doing your immediate address. So you'll be thinking about contingency plans and other important responses to extreme risks. This is the first step in a structured approach to be able to develop your risk management plan. And so what the matrix feeds, if we can go to the next slide, Anna, is component number 2 of a decent risk management plan, which is a risk log. And you can see this is an extract, not of a real risk log, but of an example that I developed. It comes from Excel. I have done all my risk logging in the last 26 years in Excel. I'm sure there are much more exciting tools to use, but Excel works just brilliantly. So it's really simple. In this risk log, you are basically capturing a lot of your thinking from the first 4 parts of that cycle. So the identification of risk, the analysis, the assessment, and the treatment. Obviously, a risk log is used to do your continuous monitoring. It's really simple. So you can see we've got a risk ID, we've got a risk description. We are using the risk categories to identify a type. Here you can see we've got a contractor competence one. You can choose risk types that are relevant to your organisation if you don't already have a framework. And then we are rating the consequence, the likelihood, which is giving us that risk level, which we have leveraged from our risk matrix. And then in the treatments column, you can see we are writing down all the possible responses to the risk. So for R1, which is our first risk here, we're thinking about using contractors and the fact that they may be exposed to or mishandle chemicals leading to injury and illness. And you can see that there are 4 dot points there in the treatments where we're making requirements of contractors. We are providing a site induction covering safety procedures. We are using safety data sheets, and we are monitoring compliance. And some of those things are contractual and some of them are operational. So there's a mix of treatments in there. And we think that's going to be a medium, so it's going to reduce our risk level. But it's, you know, that's still an activity we need to be very aware of. And there we go on R2. We've got a slightly lower risk level at medium. This is a lot about doing our due diligence on our contractors before we engage them. And we think the treatment's effectiveness is medium, but it's going to bring us down to a low. So we can feel reasonably confident in that treatment and that becoming a low risk. So you can see it's very simple. You might include additional columns in this if it starts to work as a live document. So you might record the date that the risk was last assessed. You might say whether that risk has review and reporting requirements and to who, and you might make some comments as well. So you can expand on this. I just didn't want to put too much on a slide. We think about the fact that we cannot remove the risk of incidents occurring completely. We don't want to be risk adverse, but the risk log helps us make sure everybody's doing their due diligence in analysing the risk and mitigating with a treatment that's going to reduce likelihood. Or we state where there are no treatments and where we need a contingency plan, and obviously state where that contingency plan can be found. Now, in order for those treatments to work, we need to make sure that those risks are owned and the treatments flow through to operational activity. And that's what I want to look at next in component 3 of a good risk management plan. So here we need to make sure we're assigning responsibilities, and that risk log does not come to life. It does not work if people don't own those risks. So you can see here that we've split the risk, so it will vary by stakeholder. There might be lots more stakeholders. This is an example where we're looking at the management committee and staff and volunteers. Risk ownership is making sure that risks don't fall through the cracks and making sure we know who's accountable and responsible. So at the top level, in this example, the management committee is holding accountability for the risks. They don't necessarily manage the day-to-day risks, but they own them. And their role is to make sure risks are being properly monitored and addressed. This means assigning specific risks to named committee members, embedding risks into their regular agenda, and reviewing risk registers as part of regular governance. You can see this is contrast to what we would expect of staff and volunteers on the ground. They don't own the risks overall, but obviously they play an absolutely critical role in controlling them. These are the people who are embedding safe practices, reporting incidences, and making sure procedures are followed in daily work. In practice, risk ownership is shared, but it's differentiated. The committee stays accountable at the governance level, while the staff and volunteers are responsible at an operational level. And if this works well, it should create a feedback loop where issues are picked up early, reported upwards, and leadership can make sure that the issues are acted upon. And if that happens, then you can feel very confident that risk management is becoming embedded in the culture. Now, so let's have a think about the last and fourth component, which is making sure you embed your treatments into day-to-day practices. Now, this is a very small example of things that you can do. And when the rest of the speakers, Marissa, Robbie, Daryl, and Des, come online, they're going to really bring this to life. So there's just three broad categories of examples here. We've got some safety and risk management practices. So that would be things like risk assessments, site-specific risk assessments before we perform activities. The other example is PPP use and making sure there are daily checks that everything is available and actually being used. The next category is compliance and record keeping, so making sure we've got our chemical usage logs going if we're using chemicals, and we're ensuring we've got certified handlers supervising from storage to disposal. Another example is permits and landholder agreements, making sure we've got copies of relevant approvals or permissions where we need them.
Natalie, sorry, 2 minutes.
Yes. 2 minutes. Okay, I've only got 2 minutes. And the last one is operational practices, very similar to safety and risk management practices. So some site condition checks and tool and equipment checks, and make sure everything is stored safely and maintained properly. So as I said, the other speakers will talk about these things in practice and probably talk you through some tools that can be used. So I just want to wrap up by summarising what we think good risk management should look like. So it's proactive, integrated and continuous on that cycle. It's not about reacting to crisis well after they occur. It's about building a system that can anticipate uncertainty and respond effectively. So we want everybody to be thinking about risk first. Strong organisations should embed risk awareness in their everyday decision making. Everybody needs to know what to do. A hallmark of good risk management is clarity. Strategy should be realistic and well communicated, and everyone should know what their role is. We need to make sure transparency and accountability are essential and clear, and really good communication channels with stakeholders. And finally, and this is really important, that near misses and concerns are taken seriously and not overlooked. If we do that, we will learn continuously, learn from past failures, and risk management becomes a living process and not a compliance exercise. And that to me is good risk management. It's pretty simple. It's not compliance, it's continuous, and everybody's thinking about it. So thank you. I'm going to wrap up there because I know I'm at my 2 minutes. Any questions?
So Natalie, please feel free to pop. We've got about 5 minutes for questions. So if you have some for Natalie, please put them in the Q&A now. But we do have an interesting question from Brian. So Brian asked if the management of risk applied as far as reasonable, practicable or not, and not absolute. So is the management of risk applied as far as reasonable, practicable, or not absolute? So I guess what Brian's trying to say is, yeah, you probably know, yeah.
Yeah, I think yes, we have to address risk as far as is practical, and where we've got those very extreme risks, that is a management decision about whether we don't do an activity because the risk is just too high. So if you can only get as far as is practical and the risk is very extreme, you might decide that activity is not worth it. But mostly there are enough practical mitigations or contingency plans to go ahead, in my experience. Hope that answered your question, Brian. Sorry if it didn't.
Okay, that was a good answer. Oh, we've got another one that just came. Do you have definitions for scales of likelihood and consequence?
There are lots, and you would find them on the internet. When I have done this for clients, which I mostly do with business cases, writing business cases, I will set the parameter with my clients for those things. So around financial risks, we'll be looking at financial scales for the impact, for example, which is relative to the program we're requesting funding for. So I would suggest that those things are best defined by the organisation, given their environment and the activities they're performing.
Thanks, Natalie. And this one is for us. I think, are the risk matrix and log examples available through LVI? And the answer is yes. And I will be sending some templates through via email after this webinar.
Yeah.
Just waiting for a few more questions to come through, and if we'll give it a few seconds, if no one has anything, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions a bit later. So I'm pretty happy to continue, which we might do. Head over to our next speaker, and that is Marissa from AgVic. Marissa, if you are ready.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm joining you tonight from the land of the Wurundjeri people. So I work with Agriculture Victoria in a group that regulates the use of agricultural chemicals And we do this through a number of activities, including conducting audits, responding to complaints, and we also conduct an annual program that monitors pesticide residues in fresh produce to help us inform us about the use of chemicals in that process. As we've seen from Natalie's presentation, there are many risks to be considered in anything that we do, and this is also the fact when it comes to using chemicals. As this is only a 10-minute presentation, I've chosen just to look at a few of the potential risks when using chemicals and won't necessarily go into great detail, but happy to take questions even after this, this workshop or this webinar. So I'll start with the legislative framework that the chemical team within AgVic works under to regulate the use of chemicals in Victoria. So there are a lot of agencies that have a stake in chemical use, and each of them regulates different risks. But any ag or vet chemical user that has responsibilities under our Act, AgVic's Act, which is the Agricultural Veterinary Chemical Control of Use Act, and all of the subordinate legislation in relation to that. There's also other legislation to be aware of that AgVic doesn't necessarily have responsibility for. When it comes to ag and vet chemicals, it's important to know that the APVMA is responsible for the assessment and registration of ag and vet chemicals that are used in Australia. They're responsible for everything up to and including the point of sale. And once the chemical is sold, this responsibility shifts to the states and territories, who are responsible for legislating the use of the chemicals. Risks are encountered at all stages, pre and post supply of all of these chemicals. And next slide, thanks, Anna. So there are a lot of things to consider before you even decide that chemicals are the best way for controlling a pest plant or pest animal. Once you decide that the use of chemicals is the best option or the most effective option, and the safest, there are many risks to consider. Some of these are listed here, and I'll touch on the key risks that relate to Agriculture Victoria's remit, but happy to discuss any other identified risks another time. Move to the next slide. Thanks, Anna. So we'll start with human health risks. There are a wide range of risks associated with exposure to chemicals by the user or as a bystander or even as a consumer of produce. The chemical user can manage the risks by wearing appropriate PPE, including gloves, masks, goggles, and protective clothing while they're both preparing or mixing the chemicals, as well as while they're applying them. Chemical users should be suitably trained and ensure they follow the labels. Product labels are legal documents, and by following them, human health related risks should be managed, as many of these have been assessed as part of the registration process by the APVMA or the Australian Pesticide and Veterinary Medicines Authority. Residues in food from the use of chemicals are also assessed at the time of registration. Moving on to the next slide, thanks, Anna. When it comes to managing risks to the environment, regulations from agencies other than Agriculture Victoria, such as the EPA, will need to be considered. You have a responsibility as a chemical user to not cause damage to the environment from the use of chemicals. Where possible, the APVMA will address the impact from the use of chemicals on the environment at the time a product is assessed for registration. This is a continuous process by the APVMA, as they also review registered chemicals, which can sometimes lead to changes on the label in order to manage certain risks. Some of the statements or directions on the label will be there to manage the risks to the environment. This is another good reason to read the label of any chemical products thoroughly before you use it and ensure that you follow those instructions and understand them. Environmental damage can include water contamination due to runoff into rivers or leaching into groundwater, soil degradation, air pollution, which may be due to the volatilization and drift of spraying chemicals, and non-target species impact, like, for example, harming bees, aquatic life, native flora and fauna. You should always seek additional information from other sources, which could include your reseller or the point where you obtained the chemicals. Also refer to the websites of Agriculture Victoria, which has a lot of information, as well as the EPA, your local council or your local land care coordinator. Moving on to the next one. Thanks, Anna. The regular use of chemicals can result in a plant or pest becoming resistant to a particular chemical if it's not used in the correct manner. If this happens, it means that you have fewer tools available to you to manage that plant or animal pest. The most effective way to avoid this happening and maintaining access to chemicals is to rotate chemical modes of action. Use the recommended rates that are on the label. Use at rates or frequency other than the label can mean the target pest can build up a resistance to the chemical. Combine chemical and non-chemical methods, for example, mechanical weeding. And you should also monitor pest populations for early signs of resistance. Moving on to the regulatory and legal risks. So when using chemicals, it's important to know your legal obligations with your local, state and federal regulators. As I said earlier, it's the states and territories that are responsible for regulating the actual use. In addition to the use of the chemical, be aware of your responsibilities when it comes to storage and disposal also. These responsibilities often fall under other acts or other agencies. Please refer to Agriculture Victoria's website for all legal requirements under Victoria's Control of Use Act. Things to consider when using chemicals are: what training do you need? Are you required to have a license or permit to purchase or even use the chemical? Under this, you should note that there are some chemicals that are restricted when it comes to use and will require particular licenses or permits when using them in Victoria, such as the Agricultural Chemical Users Permit, commonly known as an ACUP. While most of these restricted use chemicals are Schedule 7 chemicals, there are some, for example, the Genfarm Triclopyr 600 EC herbicide, that's not an S7 but is a restricted use chemical. A full list of all restricted supply and restricted use chemicals can be found on the AgVic website. You must keep records associated with all chemical use. You are legally required to make a record of chemical use within 48 hours of using it, and you must keep that record for a minimum of 2 years. It's important to know too that an authorised officer can request to audit the records at any time. It's important to read and follow all label instructions. This is one of the best ways to manage all risks associated with chemical use. Operational and economic risks can be managed by maintaining all all equipment by thoroughly cleaning and calibrating all spray equipment and ensuring that it's always in good working order. Also, by following label directions will also help, as products will be approved for using the least amount of a product to control a given pest. So by using more than what's stipulated on the label is only costing you money. You may also want to consider if the use of chemicals is in fact the best option for control. You may want to consider other options, including manual or mechanical options, and also give consideration to integrated pest management where beneficials are used in conjunction with chemical use. So finally, this diagram summarises how the risks I've discussed can be managed. As I mentioned, there are many other risks that need to be managed when it comes to the use of chemicals. It's always best to do a thorough risk assessment before using any chemical for any purpose. And if chemicals are identified as being the best or only option, ensure that they're used in a legal and safe manner and that use doesn't result in impacting human health or the environment. You need to know your legal obligations, use chemicals according to the label, and make and keep records of use at all times. Next slide, thanks, Anna. So thanks for your time, and I believe that we'll be taking questions on this topic after Robbie's presentation, which is coming up next. So thank you.
Thanks, Marisa. That was a great timing. Thanks. Now, head over to you, Robbie.
Thanks, Anna, and hello to everyone out there. I'm coming to you from the beautiful Bunurong country in the Basque Coast Shire. It's been a great day down here, and I'm here to talk to you about risk assessment when we are coming to actually undertake chemical or herbicide application. So a little bit of context, I started with Basque Coast Land Care Network in 2007, a long time ago now. And over that time, we've developed our on-ground arm. We have up to maybe a dozen staff working. And then we started a Indigenous plant nursery in 2016, have 3 staff there, and a pest animal team with 3 staff also a couple of years later. So we use a range of herbicides and pesticides throughout those teams. And we've really had to get on top of our risk management and our compliance and record keeping over the last 15 years or more. So for this little chat, I want to talk about how, where, and who uses chemicals within the Basque Coast, how we assess the risk quickly, how we mitigate that risk, touch on compliance and record keeping, and that's more so to do with reducing organisational risk, and then chat about a tool that we use to help manage and record our risk processes. Thanks, Anna. So one of the teams that do most of the chemical application, they undertake all the weed control, the site prep during re-veg season. They spray a whole range of herbicides. They do woody weeding, but also the pest team put out 1080 baits, pindone for rabbits, and also use fumigants. A whole range of work sites. One of the high risk work sites that we work on our roadsides, and so they're 100k and without hardly any verges, so quite dangerous. We work on public and private lands and use a range of equipment such as your big quick spray units, forward dryers, ATVs, backpacks, etc. Thanks, Anna. Don't worry about the detail here, just wanted to point out that there's a lot of herbicide that we do use and that it changes quite regularly. Supply is not always guaranteed. Sometimes you can't get something, so you have to switch. And you need to stay on top of all the label requirements, as Marissa's pointed out. So there's a fair bit of work to stay on top of that and to make sure the people applying it are across it as well. So we're following all the regulations. And next slide, thanks. And then other staff work on their own projects and apply herbicides. And we have all the volunteers at our nursery and our nursery staff that use chemicals as well. So there's a bit going on and it's a little bit of work to stay on top of it all. So how do we go about reducing the risk? I won't go into too much detail because Natalie's covered it really well. We break down each task that we do into different steps, and for each step, identify the hazard that's involved, and then assess the risk of that happening. So that's the probability and the consequence, and then determine the best treatment for that step or that hazard. And I really like this table. One of our past chairs, Rick Oldham, was right across this stuff, and he pointed this one out. It's really easy to try and treat a hazard with just PPE. It seems like the most obvious thing to do, but it's the least effective thing you can do. Obviously, the best thing you can do is totally avoid that hazard and that risk, but it's not always possible. So we need to think a little bit harder about how we treat the hazards and try and substitute it or engineer different controls to make it less likely of occurring. And then assess the risk afterwards. And this document here is, no, you're right, that's okay, Anna, thanks. This document here is actually a risk assessment that we use for applying herbicide. And it goes through all the steps that Natalie's talked about assessing risk, putting a treatment in place, but most importantly, assigning someone who's going to be responsible for managing that risk for that step. So it's just not left to the group, and then sort of no one really takes ownership of it. Thanks, Anna. So other ways of reducing the risk of using herbicide is just really be on top of the weather. Obviously, you can't spray if it's raining. The wind in the Bass Coast can be pretty strong at times, and there's a lot of crops that will be affected by drift. So we're right across what the weather's doing. Another important factor is the heat and humidity. You can get volatile herbicides and chemicals vaporizing and drifting and settling somewhere else. So you've got to make sure the heat and humidity is perfect for spraying. There's a measure called the delta T, and you can get this using your little weather mates or your kestrels, and that's a combination of both the humidity and the temperature. And if you spray within the green zone in that table, you will not have any drift happening due to the heat, basically. But there's other considerations as well. So in our area, there are quite a few organic farms, and there are a few people in towns who have actual chemical allergies. So we have maps that we give to all our workers that outline those areas. So we either avoid them or we notify the people, and they are happy to stay inside for that day. Thanks, Anna. Another good way of minimising off-target damage is being really strategic with your herbicide choice. There are grass-specific and also broadleaf specific herbicides out there. So, if, for instance, you want to control cockure in a re-veg site, it's, the grass is smothering the little seedlings. You can choose a grass-specific herbicide that won't affect the seedlings. As mentioned earlier, use the wind to your advantage. If it's blowing away from a crop, you're pretty safe to spray there. But another important aspect is adjusting your pressure and nozzle pattern to create larger droplet size. So lower pressure and a sort of probably wider nozzle pattern will create a larger droplet. And I apologise that the table below is in imperial measurements, but it illustrates quite well the difference in drift. So at 8 kilometre wind, a very coarse droplet will move less than a foot, whereas the fine stuff can go for 45 feet. And so this has been mentioned earlier as well, making sure your staff are really well trained and aware of the hazards, and having a really good workplace culture. So a safety first approach, which is easier said than done, but it's really important. So we have a training register for all our staff. It just helps us keep track of who needs what sort of training for the job they're doing, and also to make sure any licenses or certificates are renewed before they expire. Marissa mentioned, the AgVet Chem certs, 1080 certificates, but also things like traffic management as we work on roadsides, and first aid are really important. And we do the on-the-job training as well. So we don't want to rely on someone turning up just with a qualification and we don't know how experienced they are. We like to check in, see how they're going, and if they're not that experienced, we help them gain that, so everyone's going to be pretty safe. We get all our staff to read and sign those risk assessment documents at the start of a task that they haven't completed before, or at the start of their employment. just to help with awareness. And we do take fires before we commence at the site every day. So we get staff around, we look at the site to make sure there are any hazards there are assessed and everyone's aware of it. And then we do a risk assessment as well. And that's really important again for volunteer days. So like a planting day, we want to do that and then brief the volunteers as well and make sure everyone's signed a risk register for insurance purposes as well.
Have about 2 minutes, Robbie.
Thanks. Compliance and record keeping, I'll skip through this pretty quickly. We have a full suite of OH&S policies and procedures. I really take my responsibility as an employer seriously. We want to make sure our staff are really safe. We don't want anyone to be injured. Marissa mentioned all the relevant licenses you need and making sure insurances are current. And this is where LVI has been great as our insurer. We check in with them every year to make sure high risk activities are covered. Maintenance schedules for equipment and recording all these processes as well in the event that you need to prove something. SDSs are worth mentioning. You need to have a current safety data sheet for every chemical you have in your workplace. Next slide, thanks. And as Marissa mentioned as well, completing chem logs within 48 hours. And also the basic things like making sure your chem storage is suitable, it's bundled, it's got all the appropriate signage, and we have emergency showers and eye washes and spill kits. And so finally, the Safety Culture app is a tool that we use to help manage these processes, help with record keeping, but also to reduce barriers for our staff in undertaking risk assessments and recording them and sending them on as well. It's free for organisations who have 10 or less people registered through this app, and you can create any form that you want. So the app, the forms that we've created, you can see there. I might skip to the next slide. Thanks, Anna. And it's pretty intuitive, but you can pretty much put any field in there. You can have a text box as an answer. You can create standardized answers with tables. You can put all sorts of logic behind it. So if a certain answer is given, like maybe it's a high risk activity, then you need to say the next step is what's the treatment? And it's next slide. Thanks, Anna. And it's been really good for this chem log because we can have all our herbicides listed that we use so people can quickly fill the form out. And like I said, it just reduces that barrier. And on the next slide, this is one of the best functions. It keeps a record of all the forms we filled out. So over the last couple of years, we've nearly done 1,000 forms, and it's really easily accessible. And if someone or a client wants a chem log or something, it's all there online, ready to go. And that's it. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Robbie. I think that was very, very helpful to everyone. And thanks, Marissa, as well, for filling in those gaps around legislation and all the boring things we don't want to hear about but have to do. So I do have a question here that is for myself. So for the ones that do not know, my role is actually dealing with insurance. So if you have any queries regarding insurance, they'll be with me. And so there's a question here from Kath about, does Humanitics listing of attendees meet the requirements regarding insurance for plantings, etc. for volunteers? I would say no, because Humanitics listing of attendees, you don't exactly know who's there on the day. You might have people missing. It is also very important to have a list on the day where you record the time of entry and the time of exit from that activity. And exactly who was there. So it doesn't necessarily, like we had, for example, today we had about 95 people registered, and we had, 30 turning up. And you never know if someone new is going to turn up. So I'd say we do have some lists available as well if you need to use them. But yeah, I think it's best to record on the day the details of who they are, when they're coming, and when they're going, as well as an induction, as Rob said, on the day about the risks on the day. If it is a slopey terrain, you know, going alone versus going with someone else, having a phone to contact. Yeah, there's numerous risks. Yeah, so any more questions? We've got a little bit of time for questions. I think, you know, we give it about 5 minutes or so. If you want to pop something in the chat for Robbie and Marisa, the time is now. Or we can keep going, and if you need a bit more time to think about your questions, you can just keep popping them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end too. Yeah. But yeah, risk is definitely something that, you know, it's in front of everyone's faces when they're doing activities in any type of job, including in land care. The variety of risks in land care are just enormous. But we cannot be risk adverse. We just need to be able to identify them, substitute some risks, some of the things we do for things that are safer. Yeah, but find a way around them. We just definitely don't want people stop people from doing their job and the amazing job in land care. Well, doesn't seem to have any. We don't seem to have any more questions coming through, so I think I'll be happy to stop sharing my screen because now we're going to have Daryl from SSAA Victoria presenting about the use of firearms in Victoria for the control of pests.
Awesome. Can everyone hear me?
Thanks, Daryl. Yes, we can.
Excellent. So I'm going to change the tone just a little bit. We've talked about weeds a lot, and a lot of risk management. So a massive part of my role here at Sporting Shooters is managing risk. So just a quick introduction. So I deliver vocational training, firearms training to people like Melbourne Airport, Essendon Airport, Launceston Airport, Parks Victoria, DECA, Phillip Island Nature Parks, and the Game Management Authority. So as you can see by those people and their workplaces, massive amount of risk involved. And a lot of that training is teaching them how to manage the risks involved. I also deliver RTO training through our registered training organisation. So I deliver the used firearms to humanely destroy animals and the used firearms to safely and humanely harvest wild game. So they're the two courses that all professional shooters do. So the first one is anyone from council workers euthanizing animals on the side of the road, all the way through to professional shooters culling deer in national parks, state forests, etc., would all have the 304 course. And then our harvesters, people that are harvesting kangaroos or harvesting deer, for instance, would have the 303 course as well. So I deliver those courses. So that's my job number one. My other job here is I manage programs. So the main program I manage is called the Conservation Pest Management Program, or the CPM program. So we're contracted by Parks Victoria to supply volunteers for pest and problem animal management, mainly in national parks, but across the whole Parks Victoria estate. So my role there is with the volunteers. So I select, train, accredit, and manage those volunteers. And with the actual programs, I develop the firearms use operations plans. I maintain all the equipment, so rifles, thermal scopes, ammunition, silencers, etc. I do a lot of operations controls, so I actually am on the ground running the operations, and I also mentor volunteers. So every time we get a new volunteer into the system, it's me who holds their hand for the first month or so. So over the past 4 years, a bit of an example, we've run 206 programs, using about 108 volunteers, controlling 5,351 animals, and using about 5,185 volunteer hours. So for each volunteer hour, we pretty much remove one animal from the Park Victoria estate. So a fairly big program. To quickly talk about some legislative stuff, some requirements that our volunteers need, or professional shooters, anyone doing this control work needs. So licenses, obviously, we need to control pests and problem animals in Victoria. So the main thing we need is a Victorian firearms license, category A or B. So if controlling pests or problem animals, no other licenses are required. But if we're hunting, so deer hunting, for instance, we need a game license as well, endorsed for deer hunting. So there's a bit of conjecture. We already had a quick discussion before this about some of the legalities around deer control. But essentially, deer are declared as wildlife in Victoria under the Wildlife Act. having them listed as game animals under the Wildlife Act or as wildlife under the Wildlife Act makes sure they're harvested in a safe, sustainable and humane manner. And game licenses are used under that to manage game hunters. So to manage the hunters, not to protect the deer. So deer aren't actually protected. So just quickly on private land, there's an unprotection of deer on private property. So a governor and council order. So basically that means that deer are unprotected on private land. So landowners can destroy problem deer at their convenience, or they can, the land manager, permanent employee or any agent, so anyone with written permission can control deer on private property. Spotlights can be used, thermal scopes, etc. So deer can be destroyed year-round with no bag limits or any restrictions. The only restriction is minimum calibers, so just the standard deer calibers, which are a bit technical. We won't go into too much detail there. The other thing excluded on there is hog deer, but hog deer can be controlled with ATCW or Authority to Control Wildlife. Those deer can be used for personal consumption, or we can use a commercial harvester to remove those deer. So that's on private property. On public land, we've also got, under the Wildlife Act, we've got a control of deer on public land order. So it's exactly the same thing. It means deer are unprotected on public land as well. So the public land manager can hunt or can destroy deer on public land. So hog deer are included also, but only in national parks. So they must possess a written permission by the land manager. So essentially the land manager can use our volunteers or professional shooters to remove deer on public land. So there's no control, there's no other permits required. They can do that. So those volunteers or professional shooters can remove those deer, and all they need to do is make sure they're tagged. So name and address, name of authorized person, the location where the deer was destroyed and the date that the deer was destroyed. Again, it's a minimum caliber there, but we won't go into too much detail. So just talk about risk management plans. So every operation we do, no matter where it is, or whether you're doing it on your own land or whether you are doing it on public land, we need to have a plan. And so to manage these risks, we use what we call an animal management plan, or in the public sector, it's generally called a firearms use operations plan. So that plan needs to detail what we're trying to manage, why we're trying to manage it, when we're trying to manage it, where we're trying to manage it, and how we're planning to manage it. So it's the old who, what, where, why, when. So that's what's already heard mentioned tonight. So it's the same deal. So in our plan, we need to go through all those things. And those things definitely help us manage the risks involved. So that animal management plan should include things like maps. The maps should obviously contain property boundaries, any no-shoot zones, any known hazards that we already have identified, any other key features, and any signage location. All of our programs have signage. Obviously, we're operating in national park, etc. We don't always close the parks, but we always have signage around. They should also include a SOP or a SWIMS sort of statement. So our standard operating procedures. These cover our health and safety considerations, the required equipment, including minimum calibers, projectile weights, etc. Our shooting procedures, like how we're going to go about it, whether it's vehicle-based, on foot, walking, etc. Carcass handling and disposal, so huge risks involved there. There's biosecurity as well. And a really good source for these SOPs in doing any control work, whether it's rabbits, pigs, goats, foxes, deer. PestSmart is a great source for SOPs. You'll find really detailed guides on all those animals, which we all use, government departments, etc. We all steal them from there and put them into our plans. Your animal management plan should also include monitoring and evaluation. Is the damage being mitigated and are your objectives being met? We hear a lot about deer control programs and people just go out and shoot deer. It's not much point unless we know we're going to have the desired outcomes. So we need to be able to measure that somewhere. Other documentation to consider is licenses and permits. Training records, already heard training records mentioned a fair bit. It's really important to have a really good record of whether they're staff, volunteers or contractors, have a really good record of the training. For example, the 304 use firearms to mainly store animals is a bare minimum. Dispatch records. I also know some operators that go out and shoot deer and they don't really keep any thorough records of what they've done or where they've done it. Public liability insurance is a really important one, and I'll cover that a bit more in a second. And a stakeholder plan. So we need to manage the stakeholders as well, which is a bit of risk there as well. So this is just a quick example of the sort of stakeholder plans we come up with. So we have our stakeholder groups, we have the nature of their interest, the timing of engagement and the method of engagement. We talked earlier before this meeting about some requirements about notifying Victoria Police, etc. None of these are requirements. These are just things that we do. So we have stakeholders, obviously Victoria Police, using firearms. It's a legal safety issue. Timing of engagements is prior to all operations. We notify Victoria Police, especially when we're operating on public land. And the method of engagement, so personal briefings as appropriate. We go down with conservation groups, RSPCA, parks, friends groups, the media, adjoining landowners, always letting the adjoining landowners know is very important. The general community and parks visitors, etc. So that's just a bit of an idea of our stakeholder plan and how we manage that risk with our other stakeholders. We looked before at our, I think Natalie touched on it before very well, a lot better than I'm going to do, how we had our risk management cycle. This is essentially our risk management cycle. We've got a little acronym, we call it AIM. So we're assessing we're assessing hazards, we're identifying our risks, and then we're going to mitigate our risks. And obviously we can't always mitigate those risks, but we mitigate them where we can. In the Parks Victoria context, we really have to accept some risk. We're removing deer from parks within the Melbourne peri-urban area. So some of those risks we obviously can't mitigate, some of them we have to accept. And some of it obviously we transfer via public liability insurance, etc.
2 minutes, Daryl.
No worries. So just talk quickly about identifying hazards. We identify them through observation, discussion, reading, consultation, and safety inspections. We always need to remember that we don't look for it, we can't find it. And our volunteers, we always try and get them to run through these as well, always looking for hazards and reporting them so we can add them into our plans. Environmental hazards, we're similar to what we've already talked about earlier, terrain, weather, vehicles, animal carcasses, fire, etc. So then we go through a JSA, which is we base on a matrix. It's essentially a risk log. We list our risks. We list our hazards, the risks involved with those hazards. Then we implement safety measures and how we maintain or improve. Just quickly, handling firearms, driving off-road, shooting, accessing land, all those things. Then we go through with that matrix and we rank them exactly the same as we saw before from Natalie. Just quickly, with volunteers versus contractors. So firearms licenses are the same. Volunteers have just a recreational firearms license. Contractors can have the same license or a professional hunting license. You need that professional hunting license in order to get insurance. Accreditations, we already touched on them. Our volunteers aren't required to have, a volunteer on private land is not required to have accreditation. Our volunteers have a conservation pest management qualification and generally a 304 qualification as well. But there's some of the examples of the qualifications they may hold. But our contractors, 304 or 304, they must have an accreditation, and that accreditation will help them get a professional license and public liability insurance. Just quickly on that insurance, volunteers may be covered by association membership, SSAA, ADA, Field and Game all offer 20 million plus in insurance. But this is for recreational or volunteer. The minute that money changes hands, the shooter/contractor must have their private insurance. Which I thought I had something in there, but I don't. But yeah, they must have private insurance. And just quickly, we do offer a farmer assist service, which is basically a job board. It's a free service where farmers and landowners can register and get access to our volunteer shooters. You have total control, so the farmer or the landholders have total control over who comes on their property. There's only accredited shooters, so they're SSAA members registered for the program, and they are undertaking a shooting skill test. It is fairly basic, but they have done some sort of shooting test, and they're covered by SSAA insurance. So Farmer Assist is a great program. We always encourage people to use it, and it's a very good first stepping stone into having some volunteer control programs, which I'm sure Des will cover a bit more in a minute. And just some links, we'll share these later, but with Deer Control, GMA is a great source. VicPol, obviously for firearms licensing. PestSmart is a great source for risk management, especially around all those pest animals with standard operating procedures. Farmer Assist program is where a job board for volunteer shooters, and SSAA Vic for all your training needs. How's that?
That was very good, Daryl. I think it was very informative. Just got a
Get
question for you before we head to Des. Is that if our land care groups can actually contact you to if they're interested in shooting pests contact you for a list of volunteers, they might be able to work with them.
Yeah, certainly. So my program that I manage is a 100% Parks Victoria program, but I am more than willing to work with land care groups, and I can certainly recommend the volunteers that are involved in that program. So they are very highly qualified and experienced. So yeah, we can certainly work together on that. I'm more than happy to talk to any land care people that can contact me.
And just a disclaimer that it is a requirement of we do cover activities that involve firearms. Landcare Victoria does cover, insurance does cover for that. It is a requirement that you do let Landcare Victoria know that you are doing those activities. It is considered a high risk for obvious reasons. So please get in touch if you are planning to do any activity involving firearms. It is also requested that you contact the police under our insurance. All right. So we're not going to go for questions yet, but please feel free to pop them in the chat. We are going to hand over to Des when you're ready, Des, from the Cardinia Deer Coalition, our member group.
Okay, yep, I'm ready to go. Thank you. Perhaps go straight to the next one. Thank you. So I won't go into the whole details about sort of who we are, but basically we're a volunteer group. We've been around for about 7 years. We've got a mission statement. We're volunteers, which are sort of environmentalists as well as hunters, and basically we're out there touting for grants to try and support, community education and community safety and protect the environment. So there are some resources on our website, and basically say, look, if you want a bit more detail as to the sorts of things we get up to, just head over to our website. Next one, thank you. So for those who don't know where Cardinia Creek is, you can see there we're basically on the southeast foothills of the Dandenong Ranges. Next one. Next, please. Yeah. And whoops, one too many. Yeah. So I thought, oh, this one be interesting. We are in a peri-urban area, so sort of centered around Beaconsfield Upper, Cardinia Reservoir sort of to our north. But you can sort of see from that, we've got a real mixture of, suburban lots, people on 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 40, 100 acres. And there's quite a bit of bush areas and council reserves. So the Cardinia Creek, which we get our name from, is basically running down the left-hand side of that image. But there, apart from Cardinia Reservoir, which is managed by Melbourne Water, there's also an old Melbourne Water Reservoir, the Beaconsfield Nature Conservation Reserve down in the right. So there's lots of areas where deer can hide. Next, please. So really there's about 4 deer types across Victoria that are common. So hog deer has been mentioned already, which is more down in Gippsland, and red deer are sort of out in the western part. We have, Bambies, fallow deer around here who love to sort of stick around in the bush and then come out and need farm grazing land. Next one. And the other is sambar deer, which are a lot more solitary. They're browsers and they do a lot of damage in the bush areas and on farms and wineries and so on. Next, please. So in thinking about this evening, really our work, you might be more interested in the sort of stuff that Daryl's talked about, which is the gun stuff and what's happening on site. But really a lot of our work is the risk management is up front, and it's mainly about communication and setting expectations. So initially, we've basically got a small amount about our organisation set up. Policies and procedures are very important, and then they flow into the on-ground control. So as I mentioned, we're volunteers and people with an environmental bent, whether it's protecting the bush or productive farmland or just road safety, which has become more prevalent an issue in the last couple of years. We incorporated 1 year after we were set up as just a small sort of club to begin with, and that was really to try and give the committee members some sort of protections because we are involved with firearms. We joined Landcare, and as Anna was just mentioning, we did disclose, yes, we use firearms, and we've got our professional indemnity insurance for our group via that method. We chose to set up what we call a referral method, and that was because the people on the committee really can't control the shooting on site as such. So we thought it was best to set procedures, expectations. We would have a vetted list of what we call controllers, which are hunters that are willing to go out regularly to reduce deer numbers. We give advice to landowners. We introduce controllers if they want to proceed with some sort of cull program, and then it's between the landowner and the controller that make the agreement about how things are going to work on site. Next, please. So in adding controllers to our group, we follow sort of risk management, even though we don't have a log per se. So we've got a 20-point plan where we say, right, get a non-hunter to just talk to the person up front. What are their motivations? Are they just after filling their freezer? Are they just want the stag with the antlers? Are they willing to target females instead of just whatever deer they see? And just get, are they going to align with our principles? We asked for a copy of their firearms license and their insurance, which Daryl's mentioned is typically for our volunteers through SSAA or ADA. And we asked for 3 references. We check the references, and if we think, yep, they seem okay, we ask them to review our document and sign that they're willing to comply with the guidelines of that document. At that point, we then would pass them over to one of our sort of senior controllers that helped us sort of set up the group initially. We've got sort of 2 or 3 of those people, and they basically have, again, another conversation, hunter to hunter, and basically just, tease them about their experience, their knowledge of deer, and their views and how they manage community safety. Interpersonal skills is mentioned there because that's sort of important once they're actually talking with landowners and dealing with them regularly, managing expectations and the risks around shooting. As Daryl's mentioned, we ask that they comply with the Sambar deer standard, which is slightly higher ammunition standard compared to the smaller deer. We get them to do an accuracy shoot, and if that looks good, they'll probably then go on to be recommended to be, yes, accepted. If there's some little doubt, then they might be asked to sort of, go out with one of our people just to further assess them. Next, thanks. So really, it's about setting expectations before we get controllers anywhere near a landowner. We're after humane treatment of animals, the respecting of the landowners. They're going on to personal property. Any impacts on local community, neighbours can get a bit upset if they're shooting nearby unless they've been sort of notified. And it's about prioritising the reduction of deer because we're trying to get the numbers down, and that will help improve the environment. We outline steps how to assess a property, so we give them a detailed list of things to consider, and also similarly issues about steps how they can go about their deer culling on site. One of the requirements is that they report data back to the committee so we can build up a view as to what's happening, and also that helps us with things like reporting back to Cardinia Council or applying for grants from DECA, Parks Vic, Melbourne Water, etc. And really highlighting that the communication with the landowner and getting a good trusting relationship is part of that managing of the risk as they go about their work. Next, thanks.
You have about 2 minutes. There's two.
Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so the steps to minimise the risk, we asked landowner controller to basically initially go around the property together, establish boundaries, access points, gates where they might be able to drive their vehicles on, tracks in the property if that's appropriate, areas they're allowed to and not allowed to go into, so they might have some high value stock in certain areas of the property. Similarly, what about the neighbours, providing any information about them. And from a hunting point of view, where are the safe lines? Typically, it's shooting into a gully where there's less risk of things like ricochets and bullets travelling beyond the property boundary. Talk about how often they're going to come out. Are the carcasses okay to leave, or do they have to be removed? Are they going to shoot? Do they want them to shoot foxes or rabbits if they see them? And basically, as Daryl mentioned, very important that they get a shooting plan that details and summarises all this information, has a map, give a copy to the owner, and then they asked to sign a document, permission to cull. Ahead of them coming out on site, it's typically a phone call saying, all right, I'm going to come out tomorrow night. It might be an SMS. That gives the owner a chance to say, oh, yeah, look, I've moved some livestock around, or it's been wet, don't go down into the low paddock, those sorts of things. There might be trees down or other hazards that weren't there previously, and basically give the owners an opportunity to make sure pets are inside to reduce any accidental risk. Neighbours typically get an SMS to let them know that controlling is going to happen, but that gives them a chance to also respond. On-site working, a hunter working with a spotter is a really extra thing to reduce the risk, just to make sure that they're shooting in appropriate lines and that they're actually identified a deer and not a horse or something else. Different types of thermal and IR gear can help with that sort of thing as well. One of our hunters mentioned, in really specialised circumstances, changing the type of ammunition can actually help minimise, but that's again a fairly specialised thing. And the bottom line is, if there's any doubt, then they don't shoot. They'll be able to come back another time and get the deer the next time. And I think that's it. And it's good to see that mostly what we've done is really closely aligned with the sort of stuff Daryl's mentioning. But
Yeah, that's right. No, because we didn't have a lot of time to cross information, but I'm so pleased with all presentations tonight. We covered a lot of a long road from weeds to pests, from shooting, to chemical use, and I just really really appreciate all your time from each of you putting this together. We put on years of knowledge into an hour and a half. I think that's pretty awesome. So I'm sure there will be some questions for either Daryl or Des, or for any of our other speakers. We can also take questions from our panelists to other panelists if you're interested as well. I don't have any questions at the moment in popping in the Q&A. We've got another 3-4 minutes to go until I say our goodbyes. So yeah, if you want to ask anything in particular, this is your chance. Robbie, thanks.
Yeah, I've got just a little question for Daryl, if that's okay. We've got obviously a team that controls pest animals and involves firearms. You mentioned something about a certain course or insurance you need if you do it for a fee. I mean, our guys have I think it's the 304, and you mainly destroy. Was there something else that we might need?
No, and that sort of work, that's the minimum you'd want though. And you'd want them to redo it probably every 3 years.
Okay. Yeah, nice one. Yep.
So yeah, that's a requirement for anyone doing any public land work, especially. That's the minimum standard. And that's to make it, to go any steps further. So to get into any sort of professional shooting or culling, that would be the minimum you'd need. And then you'd need that to get to the next step, to get your insurance, to get your professional license. So yeah, we now run our volunteers through that as well. Now we're an RTO, we can deliver it to our volunteers as well. So a lot of our volunteers are doing it as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And on that as well, just for our land care members, if you are shooting with your volunteers, you're obviously covered through our insurance as well, and through, if you're registered with SSAA, through them as well. But if you are engaging with a contractor to shoot, please make sure they have, one, the right licenses, and second, the public liability insurance, their own insurance as well. It is a very, very important in order to be covered through our insurance, that contractors have their own insurance, and this actually applies to everything else, from weeding to digging to everything.
Things rarely go wrong, but when they go wrong, they go catastrophically wrong.
Yeah, I can
So
imagine.
the risks are huge.
Yes, that's right. So anyone else? Otherwise, I'm happy to finish for today, as I'm sure everyone's probably ready for dinner. If you haven't had it, I haven't. But yeah, I think we're ready to probably say goodbye. But I again would like to thank you all for attending and for the great questions from everyone. I also want to say a special thank you to our presenters tonight, again, to Natalie, Marissa, Robbie, Daryl, and Des, and also to my colleague Sarah for being on the back stage helping running this session. We're already working also on further pests and weeds webinars. So we've got a next one coming. It's on the 20th of November. At the same time, I'll be around rabbits. So keep an eye out for that. And keep an eye on our communications channels. We'll be sending emails to our members as well for other webinars as they become available. Just letting you know that when you get out of this webinar, there will be a short survey that would love you to fill that in. It's very short, and it is very important for us, so we understand your needs, and your feedback is very valuable to us, so we can continue to improve. And from the team here at Landcare Victoria, and on behalf of our speakers, I'd like to wish you all a good night, and hope to see you again in a future webinar. Good night.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.